Before we descend into the shadows of history, take a moment. Silence the device in your hand. Let the distractions of the modern world fade into the background. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It is the only way to ensure these archives remain open. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from tonight. I am always fascinated to see how far these signals travel across the globe. Now find a comfortable position. Relax your shoulders, unclench your jaw. Take a deep breath and let us peel back the skin of reality. Consider the object sitting on your kitchen counter, the curved, bright yellow crescent. It is likely the most recognizable object in any supermarket, in any country, on any continent. It is the banana. It sits there, cheerful and innocuous, a staple of school lunches and breakfast cereals. It seems natural, a gift from nature's bounty. But this is a lie. The fruit you see is not a product of natural selection, but a manufactured artifact of imperialism, a biological photocopy, and a silent witness to coups, massacres, and the toppling of sovereign nations. We look at it and see a snack. History looks at it and sees blood. To understand the precarious nature of our world, we must first understand the paradox of the Cavendish. Walk with me, in your mind's eye, into the fluorescent hum of a modern supermarket. Walk to the produce section. You see them stacked in perfect pyramids, hundreds of them. Pick one up. Feel the smooth, waxy skin. Look at its curvature. Now pick up another and another. They are identical. This is not normal. In nature, no two apples are truly the same. No two grapes possess the exact same genetic architecture. But the banana you hold, the Cavendish, is a clone. Every single banana you have ever eaten in your lifetime is a genetic twin of a single, solitary plant found in a greenhouse in England in the 19th century. They are not siblings, they are the same organism, separated by space but not by biology. Imagine a field of soldiers, millions of them stretching to the horizon. They do not just look alike, they share the exact same immune system. If a single virus, a single fungus, finds the key to unlock the defenses of one soldier, it instantly has the key to kill them all. This is the terrifying reality of the modern banana industry. We have built a global empire on a genetic tightrope, suspending a multi-billion-dollar industry over an abyss of biological collapse. It is a sterile, seedless monstrosity that cannot reproduce on its own. It requires human hands to cut its suckers and replant them, a cycle of dependency that mirrors the economic chains we are about to explore. The banana is a ghost, a living fossil kept alive by our addiction to convenience. But before the clone, there was the jungle, and before the jungle could be tamed, there had to be a sacrifice. Let us travel back to 1871. The air is thick enough to choke on. We are in the Limon province of Costa Rica. The heat is a physical weight pressing down on the canopy, trapping the humidity until the air feels like warm soup. Here, a man named Minor Cooper Keith, a Brooklyn-born ambition machine, has arrived with a singular, maddening goal: to build a railroad through hell. The Costa Rican government is desperate to get their coffee harvest from the Central Highlands to the Atlantic coast for export. Keith is the man who promised to lay the tracks, but the jungle does not want to be crossed. Picture the scene. The mud is deep, sucking the boots off the workers' feet. The relentless rain turns the construction sites into rivers of sludge. And then there is the buzzing, the ceaseless high-pitched whine of millions of mosquitoes. Keith brings in workers from New Orleans, criminals from desperate circumstances. They die. He brings in Chinese laborers. They die. He brings in Jamaicans and Italians. They die. Malaria, yellow fever, dysentery, and heat stroke claim them by the thousands. It is said that for every mile of track laid, 4,000 lives were extinguished. The railroad ties are practically resting on human bones. Minor Keith is running out of money. The railroad is a financial black hole. To feed his starving, dying workforce, he makes a decision of convenience. He orders the planting of bananas along the train tracks. They grow quickly in the humid rot of the jungle. They are cheap calories. But then a strange alchemy occurs. Keith begins using his half-finished train to ship the surplus bananas to the United States. He realizes, as the gold coins begin to flow in, that the coffee, the very reason thousands of men died building the rails, is irrelevant. The gold is not in the beans. The gold is in the yellow fruit. The railroad, built on a foundation of corpses, becomes the artery for a new empire. The jungle has been conquered not by steel, but by the banana. This accidental discovery leads to a consolidation of power that the world had never seen. In 1899, in the smoky boardrooms of Boston, far removed from the graves in Costa Rica, a merger takes place. Minor Keith's tropical holdings fuse with the Boston Fruit Company. The entity that emerges from this union is named the United Fruit Company, but to the people of Honduras, Guatemala, and Colombia, it was never called United Fruit. They looked at the map, and they saw how this company's influence spread. They saw how it owned the railroads. They saw how it owned the telegraph lines, meaning no message could enter or leave the country without the company knowing. They saw how it owned the post office. They saw how it owned the ports. They called it El Pulpo, the octopus. Imagine a creature so vast that its tentacles are everywhere. You wake up in a house on company land. You walk to work on a company road. You labor in a company field. You buy your food at the company commissary with company scrip, fake money that is worthless outside the plantation. When you get sick, you go to a company doctor. When you die, you are buried in company soil. United Fruit did not just do business in these countries, it swallowed them whole. It purchased vast tracts of land, not to farm them, but to prevent anyone else from farming them. It held nations in a state of suspended animation, ensuring that no local competition could ever arise. The governments of these sovereign nations became mere puppets, their presidents serving at the pleasure of the octopus. If a law was passed that threatened profits, the tentacles would tighten. If a tax was proposed, the tentacles would squeeze. The birth of El Pulpo marked the end of independence for Central America and the beginning of a century of servitude. In those early days of empire, the fruit itself was different. The banana that made El Pulpo rich was not the Cavendish we eat today. It was the Gros Michel. Big Mike. If you speak to the oldest members of your family, or perhaps to those who lived through the early 20th century, they might tell you that bananas used to taste better. They are not remembering it through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. They are remembering a biological fact. The Gros Michel was superior in every way. It was larger, its skin was thicker, making it resilient against the bruising journey in the hull of a ship. Its flavor was richer, creamier, more intense, a true confection of the tropics. The Gros Michel was the king. It was the engine of the United Fruit Company's wealth. It seemed invincible. But nature has a way of humbling the arrogant. In the soil of Panama, a microscopic enemy awakened, a fungus, Fusarium oxysporum. It lived in the dirt, invisible, patient. It entered the roots of the Gros Michel and moved up the vascular system, clogging the plant's ability to drink water. Imagine walking through a plantation that stretches for miles. Yesterday, it was a sea of vibrant emerald green. Today, you see the first sign, a yellowing of the lower leaves, not the yellow of ripening fruit, but the yellow of sickness. The leaves buckle, they collapse against the stalk, hanging like a skirt of dead tissue. The plant is suffocating from the inside out. The growers panicked. They didn't understand that by planting millions of identical Gros Michel bananas, they had laid out a feast for the fungus. They tried to outrun it. When a plantation died, they simply abandoned the land, leaving behind ghost towns and poisoned soil, and moved deeper into the pristine jungle to slash and burn new fields. But the fungus followed. It traveled on the boots of the workers, on the wheels of the trains, in the water of the rivers. The Gros Michel era was a time of unparalleled greed and impending doom. The octopus was feasting, growing fat on the profits of the Big Mike, blindly marching toward a cliff edge, dragging entire nations with it. They believed they could engineering their way out of nature's laws. They believed capital could defeat biology. They were wrong. And as the soil turned against them, they would turn their aggression toward the people, ensuring that if the fruit could not be saved, the profits would be preserved by blood. In the shadows of the giant United Fruit Company, a different kind of predator began to swim. While the Boston elites managed their empire from mahogany boardrooms, a man named Sam Zemery was down in the mud, breathing the humid air of the docks. They called him Sam the Banana Man, but he was more pirate than grocer. Zemery was a Russian immigrant who started by selling rotting bananas, the ripes that the big companies threw away, out of a boxcar in Mobile, Alabama. But his ambition was a fire that could not be contained by a boxcar. He looked south to Honduras, a nation teetering on debt. He saw opportunity in the chaos. He bought land. He bought officials. But when the Honduran government, pressured by American banks, proposed a tax on banana exports to pay off their sovereign debt, Zemery did not hire lawyers. He hired killers. Picture the scene on a moonless night in 1911. The port of New Orleans is quiet, save for the lapping of oily water against the hull of a decommissioned Navy yacht called the Hornet. On board, Zemery has assembled a crew that sounds like the cast of a dime store nightmare. At the helm is Lee Christmas, a colorblind mercenary general who became a legend in Central America for his ability to survive despite lacking the tactical sense to fear death. Beside him is Guy Machine Gun Moloney, a veteran of the Boer Wars whose nickname left little to the imagination. They are not shipping fruit tonight, they are shipping a revolution. The Hornet slips out of the harbor, chased by U.S. Secret Service agents, but Zemery is too fast. He sails into the dark Caribbean, his cargo hold packed not with bananas, but with rifles, ammunition, and a deposed former president named Manuel Bonilla. When they land in Honduras, it is not a battle. It is a hostile takeover disguised as a civil war. With Zemery's money and Christmas's machine guns, the government forces melt away. In a matter of weeks, the standing government is toppled. Manuel Bonilla is reinstalled as president. And his first act? He grants Sam Zemery a concession of tens of thousands of acres and, crucially, waives all taxes on bananas for 25 years. This was the moment the term Banana Republic ceased to be a metaphor and became a geopolitical reality. A corporation had literally purchased a sovereign nation for the price of a mercenary army. The flag over the capital may have been blue and white, but the true power was yellow and curved. But conquering land was only half the battle. To truly dominate the world, the banana barons had to conquer the American mind. This brings us to the polite, smoke-filled offices of 1920s New York and a man named Edward Bernays. Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he used his uncle's insights into the human subconscious not to heal, but to sell. He is the father of public relations, the man who taught corporations that they could manufacture desire just as easily as they manufactured goods. United Fruit had a problem. They had too many bananas, and Americans saw them as messy, strange, immigrant food. They were considered a luxury, or worse, a carrier of tropical disease. Bernays went to work. He did not sell the banana, he sold the fear of death and the hope of health. He launched a campaign linking bananas to the cure for celiac disease. At the time, scientists had discovered that children with celiac could digest bananas when they could digest nothing else. Bernays took this medical anomaly and exploded it into a national doctrine. Visualize the morning routine of a 1920s housewife. She opens her magazine. There, staring back at her, is a stern-looking doctor in a white coat, a figure of absolute authority. The text warns her that her child's health is fragile, that digestion is a perilous battleground. The solution? The banana. Bernays planted articles in medical journals. He convinced hotels to put bananas on the breakfast menu. He even targeted schools, distributing educational pamphlets that told children the banana was a magical fruit sealed in a germ-proof wrapper by nature itself. He manipulated the public into believing that eating a banana was a moral act of good parenting. He turned a tropical surplus crop into a biological necessity for the American child. The demand soared, and as Americans sliced bananas into their cereal, feeling wholesome and modern, they had no idea that every bite was funding a regime of terror thousands of miles away. That terror reached its boiling point in the sweltering heat of Ciénaga, Colombia, in 1928. The workers of the United Fruit Company in Colombia had finally had enough. They were paid in scrip, forced to shop at company stores, lived in squalor without latrines, and worked 7 days a week in conditions that broke men's backs before they turned 30. They organized, they struck. Thousands of them ceased work, gathering in the town's square of Ciénaga, demanding to be treated as human beings, demanding to be paid in real currency. The company did not negotiate. They called the capital. They threatened the Colombian government, hinting that if the Colombian army did not protect United Fruit's property, the U.S. Marines would land and do it themselves. The Colombian government, terrified of an invasion, sent General Cortés Vargas. It is a Sunday, December the 6th. The square is packed, not just with men, but with their wives, their children. They have just come from Mass. There is a festive, defiant atmosphere. They believe their sheer numbers, their moral righteousness, will protect them. The soldiers arrive. They set up machine guns on the rooftops surrounding the plaza. The click of the bolts echoes off the colonial church walls. A decree is read over a drum roll. Dispense, leave, or we fire. The crowd shouts back, "Long live Colombia! Long live the free strike!" General Vargas gives them 5 minutes, but 5 minutes in a jammed plaza is nothing. It is a heartbeat. The time expires. The order is given. Fuego. The machine guns open up. It is not a battle. It is a scythe cutting through wheat. The noise is deafening, a mechanical roar that drowns out the screams. Bodies fall in layers. The white clothes of the Sunday Mass turn red. The firing continues until the movement stops. History, written by the victors, tried to say only 9 people died, but the locals knew. They saw the night trains that usually carried bananas leaving the station at midnight, long and heavy, but there was no fruit on board. The trains were filled with corpses, taken to the coast and dumped into the sea, food for the sharks. It was a massacre so total that it bordered on the surreal, an event so traumatic it birthed the magical realism of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wove the tragedy into 100 years of solitude, ensuring that while the company tried to erase the memory, art would keep the wound open forever. Following the blood came the silence of the golden age of exploitation. Throughout the mid-20th century, the company town became the standard model of existence in the banana lands. These were not towns, they were open-air prisons designed by architects. Imagine flying over the jungle. You see the chaotic, deep green tangle of nature. And then, suddenly, a geometric scar, a grid. This is the company town. It was strictly segregated, a caste system carved into the earth. On one side, behind high fences and manicured hedges, lay the American zone. Here, life was a replica of suburban Connecticut. White clapboard houses with wide porches, lush green golf courses that required gallons of water daily while the locals thirsted, clubhouses serving gin and tonics, schools with English textbooks, hospitals with modern medicine. This was for the white managers, the overseers of the empire. Cross the tracks and the world changed color. The native zone, dust, heat. Barracks made of corrugated tin that turned into ovens under the midday sun. Communal latrines that stank of disease. Here lived the workers, classified by the company not as people but as units of labor. The racism was codified, American managers at the top. Below them, white locals. Below them, black workers imported from the Caribbean, preferred for their English but segregated for their skin. And at the bottom, the indigenous populations treated as beasts of burden. The company owned everything. They owned the electricity that lit your bulb. They owned the water that flowed from your tap. They owned the school that taught your children to be docile. They owned the police force that arrested you if you complained. It was a total institution. You were born in a United Fruit hospital. You lived in a United Fruit shack. And you died in a United Fruit grave. The octopus had not just bought the land, it had bought the very concept of life itself for millions of people. In the midst of this century of suffocation, a brief, blinding light pierced the canopy of Guatemala. Historians call it the 10 years of spring, a decade where democracy tried to take root in soil poisoned by authoritarianism. It culminated in the election of a man named Jacobo Arbenz. Arbenz was not a radical firebrand screaming from a balcony. He was a quiet man, a former colonel with the stern, thoughtful face of a university professor. He looked at his country and saw a mathematical absurdity. 70% of the arable land in Guatemala was owned by 2% of the population, and the largest landowner of all was, of course, the United Fruit Company. But the insult went deeper. United Fruit owned hundreds of thousands of acres that they did not even farm. They left vast stretches of fertile earth fallow, choked with weeds, purely to prevent peasants from using it, thereby keeping food prices high and labor cheap. In 1952, Arbenz passed Decree 900. It was a land reform act, but it was remarkably moderate. He did not seize the land, he offered to buy it. And here lies the delicious, tragic irony. The government offered to compensate United Fruit for the uncultivated land based exactly on the value the company had declared on their own tax returns. For decades, the octopus had lied about the value of its land to cheat the Guatemalan government out of tax revenue, claiming it was nearly worthless. Now, Arbenz smiled and said, "Very well. If it is worth so little, we will buy it for that price." The company was cornered by its own greed. They were furious. They couldn't admit they had committed tax fraud, so they screamed the only word that would terrify Washington, D.C. in the 1950s, communism. They hired Edward Bernays again. They lobbied the U.S. State Department. It just so happened that the U.S. Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his brother, CIA Director Allen Dulles, were both former lawyers for United Fruit. The conflict of interest was not a conflict, it was the mission. The United States government effectively became the enforcement arm of a fruit company. Enter Operation PB Success. The year is 1954. The CIA does not want a messy invasion with American troops. They want a psychological phantom. They set up a clandestine radio station in the jungles of neighboring Honduras, La Voz de la Liberación. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit room in Guatemala City. You tune your radio. Through the static, you hear reports of a massive army approaching. You hear the sounds of battle, the marching of boots, but it is a lie. There is no massive army. It is a cast of actors and sound effects, broadcast to terrify the population and the loyal army officers. To sell the illusion, the CIA hires American pilots to fly unmarked planes over the Capitol. They drop blocks of dynamite and Coca-Cola bottles filled with gasoline. The explosions do little physical damage, but the psychological impact is shattering. The sky is raining fire, the radio is screaming defeat. Arbenz is isolated. His military, bribed and terrified by the Phantom Army, turns on him. He is forced to resign. The humiliation is total. As he tries to flee the country into exile, the new military junta, handpicked by the CIA, forces the former president to strip down to his underwear at the airport in front of the cameras, a final act of degradation to show who truly owns the republic. The spring is over. The winter returns, bringing with it decades of brutal civil war that would claim 200,000 lives, all to protect the price of the banana. But history has a way of creating unintended consequences. Watching this tragedy unfold from the streets of Guatemala City was a young, asthmatic Argentine doctor. He was 25 years old. His name was Ernesto. He had come to Guatemala specifically to see Arbenz's reforms, to see if democracy could cure Latin America's poverty. He walked the streets as the CIA planes buzzed overhead. He saw the apathy of the international community. He saw how easily a democratically elected government was crushed because it dared to touch the profits of an American corporation. He wrote letters home to his aunt, his handwriting jagged with rage. He realized then that reform was a fairy tale. He realized that you cannot negotiate with the octopus. The coup in Guatemala killed the idealist doctor and gave birth to the revolutionary soldier. Ernesto fled to Mexico, where he would soon meet Fidel Castro. When the world later learned to fear the name Che Guevara, they were fearing a ghost created by the United Fruit Company in 1954. Time marches on. The company changes its name, trying to shed its reptilian skin. It becomes United Brands, but the rot remains. We jump forward to a freezing morning in New York City. February 3rd, 1975. We are standing on the 44th floor of the Pan Am building, a monolith of steel and glass towering over Grand Central Terminal. Inside the corner office is Eli Black. He is the CEO of United Brands. He is a man who was supposed to be different, a rabbi turned businessman, a man known for philanthropy, a man who spoke of ethics. But the banana trade does not allow for ethics. Black is trapped. The market is crashing. The transition to new banana varieties is costing a fortune. And worse, a secret is about to explode. He has authorized a $125 million bribe to the president of Honduras to lower the export tax on bananas. It is the same old story, money for laws. But now, in the post-Watergate era, the press is sniffing around. The Securities and Exchange Commission is closing in. The walls of his high-altitude fortress are closing in. Picture him standing by the window. The city below is a grid of grey. The wind howls around the skyscraper. He looks at his heavy briefcase. He looks at the thick, tempered glass of the window. He picks up the briefcase. He swings it with all the desperate strength left in his body. The glass shatters. The sound is swallowed by the wind. Eli Black climbs onto the sill. He does not look back at the boardroom, at the charts, at the legacy of the octopus. He steps out. His body falls 44 stories, landing on Park Avenue during the morning rush hour. It is a grotesque, violent punctuation mark to an era. The head of the beast has cut itself off. The bribe scandal, dubbed Bananagate, is revealed. The company plunges into chaos, but the machine does not stop. The gears are greased with blood, and one man's suicide is merely a delay in the schedule. While CEOs plummeted from the sky, a different kind of disaster was unfolding on the ground, not in the boardroom, but in the biological architecture of the fruit itself. The Gros Michel was dead. The fungus had won. The industry was now forced to pivot to the backup plan. The Cavendish, but this was not a simple swap. It was a logistical nightmare that required rewiring the entire planet. The great switch was upon us. The Gros Michel was tough. You could throw a bunch into a train car, and it would arrive yellow and unbruised. The Cavendish is different. It is fragile. It bruises if you look at it wrong. It is a diva of a fruit. To make the Cavendish viable, the industry had to invent a padded cell for every single banana. They could no longer ship whole bunches. They had to cut them into hands. They had to wash them. They had to invent the cardboard box. Imagine the sudden shift in the jungle, thousands of miles of new infrastructure. Packing stations had to be built every few hundred yards. Conveyor belts snaked through the rainforest. Workers were no longer just harvesters. They were factory line workers in the open air, washing, gluing, packing. The cost was astronomical. To protect this weak, pathetic replacement fruit from the jungle that wanted to eat it, the companies turned to science, or rather to chemical warfare. If the plant is weak, the poison must be strong. They began to bomb the plantations with a cocktail of fungicides and pesticides that would make a chemical weapons inspector blush. But one chemical stood out: DBCP. The trade name was Nemagen. It was designed to kill microscopic worms in the soil, but it did something else. In the packing plants and the fields, male workers began to notice something strange. They were young, strong men, yet their wives were not getting pregnant. They went to doctors. The confusion turned to horror. Their sperm counts were zero. The chemical companies knew. Tests on rats years prior had shown testicular atrophy. The EPA in the United States eventually banned it. But here is the true darkness of the trade. When the ban came down in the US, the chemical companies did not destroy their stock. They simply shipped it south. United Fruit, now Chiquita, continued to use Nemagen in Latin America for years after it was known to sterilize men. They poured it into the earth, knowing full well it was castrating their workforce. Thousands of men in Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and the Philippines were left sterile. They were robbed of their future, of their lineage, to ensure that the fragile, cloned Cavendish could make it to your breakfast table without a blemish. The perfect yellow skin you see in the store is a mask hiding a legacy of genetic dead ends and human sterilization. The name United Fruit had become a curse. It was whispered with venom in the plazas of Central America and shouted with rage in the protest halls of North America. It smelled of gunpowder, rotting mulch, and the copper tang of blood. The brand was toxic. The octopus needed a mask. It is the mid-1980s, the era of corporate raids and image consultants. In the high-rise offices, a decision is made to shed the skin of the reptilian conglomerate and adopt the face of a smiling woman. They looked to their premium brand, a name that rolled off the tongue with a musical, tropical lilt. Chiquita. Visualize the sticker. That small oval of azure blue, it is iconic. It features Miss Chiquita, a character originally drawn by a cartoonist who also drew for Disney. She is festive, wearing a fruit-laden hat, reminiscent of Carmen Miranda. She dances, she sings, she promises that the fruit is sweet, safe, and fun. This was one of the most successful acts of corporate camouflage in history. By changing the name on the door from United Brands to Chiquita Brands International, they performed a psychological magic trick. They erased the Ciénaga massacre. They erased the coup against Arbenz. They erased the sterilization of the workers. When you see the blue sticker today, you do not think of the CIA dropping dynamite. You think of a healthy snack for your toddler. The blue sticker is a seal of innocence pasted over a century of guilt. But a change of name does not change the nature of the beast. The hunger for profit in lawless lands remained, and in the 1990s this hunger led Chiquita into a pact with true darkness in the lush, violent mountains of Colombia. The region is Urabá. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and unspeakable violence, a corridor for drug trafficking and a battleground for the Colombian Civil War. Chiquita's subsidiary, Banadex, operated vast plantations here. But the Colombian state was weak. The jungle belonged to the men with guns. Enter the AUC, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. They were a right-wing paramilitary group, a death squad formed to fight left-wing guerrillas, but who eventually morphed into a drug-running terror organization known for using chainsaws to dismember villagers to save ammunition. They were monsters who wore camouflage, and Chiquita hired them. Imagine a humid office in Medellin. A Chiquita executive sits across from a paramilitary commander. The commander does not ask for a donation. He offers security services. It is a protection racket, pure and simple. If you want your bananas to reach the port, you pay the toll. But it was not a one-time payment in a briefcase. It was institutionalized. From 1997 to 2004, Chiquita made over 100 payments to the AUC, totaling $17 million. Look at the accounting ledgers. The banality of evil is found in the bookkeeping. These payments were not listed as bribes for terrorists, and they were categorized as security services or sensitive payments. Every dollar transferred was a bullet. While American consumers peeled their breakfast fruit, the money they paid at the grocery store was being funneled into the hands of men who massacred peasants, assassinated union leaders, and displaced thousands of families. In 2001, the US government officially designated the AUC as a foreign terrorist organization. It was now illegal under US law to give them a penny. Chiquita knew this. Their lawyers told them this. And yet, the payments continued. Why? Because the bananas had to move. The logic of the supply chain superseded the law. The decision was cold and calculated. The risk of a fine was less than the cost of losing the harvest. It wasn't until 2007 that the justice system caught up, slapping Chiquita with a $25 million fine. A slap on the wrist, a rounding error for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The executives who authorized the payments faced no jail time. They walked away, leaving the ghosts of Urabá to scream into the void. While the blood dried in Colombia, a different kind of war was brewing across the Atlantic, a war fought with tariffs, lawyers, and trade agreements. The Banana Wars. This conflict reveals the ruthless geometry of global trade. Picture a small island in the Caribbean, Dominica or St. Lucia. The terrain is volcanic, steep. The farms are small, family-owned plots passed down through generations. These farmers cannot use machines. The slopes are too steep. They harvest by hand. Their bananas are smaller, perhaps a bit scarred by the wind, but they are grown with care. For decades, Europe protected these former colonies. The UK and France gave preferential treatment to Caribbean bananas, waiving tariffs to ensure these small island nations had an economy. It was a lifeline. But the American banana giants, Chiquita, Dole, Del Monte, looked at this map and saw a closed door. They controlled the massive industrial plantations in Latin America, where labor was cheap, unions were crushed, and economies of scale made their bananas dirt cheap. They called them dollar bananas. Chiquita wanted the European market. They didn't care about the farmers in St. Lucia. They lobbied the US government, they donated massive sums to political campaigns in Washington, and the US government obeyed. In the 1990s, the Clinton administration took the European Union to the World Trade Organization, WTO. It was a David and Goliath battle, but Goliath had the lawyers. The US argued that Europe's protection of Caribbean farmers was unfair trade. The battle raged for years. The WTO eventually ruled in favor of the US. The protective tariffs were torn down. The floodgates opened. Imagine the day the news reached the hills of Dominica. The cheap, industrial Latin American fruit flooded the European supermarkets. The price plummeted. The Caribbean farmers, with their steep hills and small outputs, could not compete. It cost them more to grow a banana than the market would pay. The industry in the Caribbean collapsed overnight. Fields went fallow. Poverty spiked. And in the vacuum left by the banana, a new crop took root. Desperate farmers, needing to feed their families, turned to the only thing that paid better than fruit: marijuana and coca. The US victory in the banana wars successfully destroyed the legal economy of the Caribbean and inadvertently fueled the drug trade that they spend billions fighting. It was a masterclass in short-sighted greed. The blue sticker had conquered the world. It had survived the coups, the massacres, the scandals, and the trade wars. It stood atop a mountain of money, the undisputed king of the supermarket. But while the lawyers and the soldiers had secured the borders, they had forgotten to watch the soil. They had forgotten the lesson of the Gros Michel. They had built their entire empire, yet again, on a single genetic clone, the Cavendish. And deep in the soil of Southeast Asia, the old enemy was waking up. It had mutated, it was stronger, and it was hungry. The enemy has a name. It sounds like a droid from a science fiction movie, Cold and Mechanical, TR4, Tropical Race 4. It is a soil-borne fungus, a mutant descendant of the killer that wiped out the Gros Michel. For decades it slept, or rather it evolved. It festered in the damp earth of Taiwan, waiting for the moment to strike. And when it did not just kill the banana plants, it annihilated them. TR4 is the terminator of the plant world. It is virtually indestructible. It can live in the dirt for decades without a host, waiting. You cannot spray it away. Fungicides do nothing. You cannot burn it out. If you walk through an infected field, the microscopic spores cling to the rubber of your boots. If you drive a truck through it, the spores hide in the treads of the tires. If a monsoon rain washes the soil into a river, the river becomes a vector of death, carrying the plague downstream to every farm along its banks. The Cavendish, the clone that replaced the Gros Michel, the banana that accounts for 99% of the global export market, has zero resistance to TR4. It is genetically defenseless. We are now watching a slow-motion car crash on a planetary scale. The plague moved from Taiwan to China, then to Indonesia, then to Australia, then the Middle East. It jumped oceans, hitchhiking on the muddy boots of migrant workers or the equipment of unsuspecting engineers. For years, the banana barons in Latin America watched the news from Asia with a nervous sweat. They built walls. They set up quarantine zones at airports, forcing travelers to dip their shoes in disinfectant baths. They put up signs, "Do not enter." They prayed that the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans would be wide enough moats to protect their dollar bananas. But nature does not respect borders. In 2019, the alarm bells rang. TR4 was detected in Colombia. The fortress had been breached. The Colombian government declared a national emergency. Soldiers were sent to guard the infected farms, quarantining them like scenes from a zombie outbreak movie. They dug trenches around the plants. They covered the soil in plastic. They burned the crops. But you cannot court-martial a fungus. It is there now, creeping through the soil of the Americas. It is moving towards Ecuador, the world's largest exporter. It is moving towards Costa Rica. It is a ticking clock. The Cavendish is walking dead. It just doesn't know it yet. This brings us to the monoculture trap, the philosophical heart of this tragedy. We look at the banana industry and we see a business failure, but it is actually a spiritual failure. It is the failure of the human desire to impose order on chaos. Nature thrives on diversity. Walk into a real jungle. You will never see 10,000 identical trees standing in perfect rows. You see chaos, vines strangling trees, ferns fighting for light, a riot of genetic variation. This chaos is actually a shield. If a bug attacks one tree, the next tree is different, so the plague stops. Diversity is the immune system of the planet. Industrial agriculture, the system that feeds us, is the opposite. It is the imposition of a factory logic onto a biological system. We clear the chaos, we plant the clone, we demand uniformity. We want every banana to curve the same way, to ripen at the same speed, to fit in the same box. We trade resilience for efficiency. In doing so, we create an ecosystem that is waiting to collapse. We have built a glass house and we are throwing stones at it. The banana is just the canary in the coal mine. We are doing the same thing to corn, to soy, to wheat. We are narrowing the genetic library of life down to a few profitable sentences. And when the fire comes, and it always comes, there will be no books left to read. So, here we are, the end of the line. Walk back to your kitchen. The house is quiet. The hum of the refrigerator is the only sound. Look at the fruit bowl again. Pick up the banana. It feels heavy in your hand. You are not just holding a piece of fruit. You are holding a ghost. You are holding the legacy of Minor Keith's railroad, built on the bones of thousands of workers in the Costa Rican mud. You are holding the silence of the Ciénaga Plaza, where the machine guns drowned out the Sunday prayers. You are holding the fear of the Guatemalan peasant watching CIA planes drop fire from the sky. You are holding the despair of the sterilized worker in Nicaragua, looking at his empty future. You are holding the blood money paid to paramilitary death squads in the Colombian jungle, and you are holding a dying breed. The banana in your hand is the last of its kind, a genetic dead end standing on the precipice of extinction. Peel it open. The smell is sweet, familiar. It smells like childhood. It smells like comfort. But as you take a bite, taste the irony. It is a fruit that toppled governments, a fruit that radicalized revolutionaries, a fruit that built empires and destroyed nations. It is the most fragile thing in the world, sustained only by a global war of chemicals and politics. And one day soon, you will walk into the supermarket and the shelf will be empty. The yellow curve will be gone, erased by the soil's revenge. Until then, enjoy it. But know what you are eating. You are eating history. And history is never sweet.